Hi guys, I have created a chat client just to show you how WebApi works together with JQuery. I'll be showing you lots of code, so feel free to pause the video and try this at home. First of all, I want to show you the end result. So I have here two browsers, two different browsers actually, and a small web page. We will be looking at the HTML for this web page in a short while. We have a text box here in where you enter your chat name, and you have a your message here. So when you want to enter a message, you enter it here and you send it. And then we have a table here that tells us what everybody has written in my chat. So let's start out. We have a chat name, and it has to have a minimum length, and it has to be unique. And given that I'm Benny, I'll type in Benny here. You can see it turns from red to green, meaning that it has used the WebApi JQuery to look it up in my, I wouldn't call it database, in my memory storage to see that Benny is unique. And therefore it's green. And then I want to type in, so I'll say hello all, and I'll simply just send it. Oh, nicely. So it says Benny at this time of day has entered this message. Let's try something else here. So my name is also Peter. So let's try it here and say yo all. Yes, it looks like it's working. I even have microseconds for my updates here. But I said it should be unique, so I can also say oh no, bad request. Not because I spelled something, but because Ben is already in use. Yes. So I am allowed to say fuck off. It's my video. But the chat name has to be unique. Here is every HTML in this application. Benny's chat. As it says here, Benny's chat. And I have a span here with the total amount of messages, which is 3. Then I have the chat name here, and I have a line, and I have your message, and the button that I use to send the message, a line again, and the table. This table here. This does nothing, and this button has nothing on it. So I must do it in some different way. And I do. So if you go to, or most important, remember to add the JQuery, because I'll be using it a lot in this video. And I know I use an old JQuery, feel free to use a newer one. So the first thing I do, I have this document ready function that says the first thing I do is I put the chat name on focus. So let's see, now it's not in focus. I press F5 and you can see it stands up here. So it's in focus. Then I change the background color to red, just in case you haven't typed in anything that's good enough. And then I bind, Then I bind the input field here. I bind it to a function that is called test chat name. And then eventually I put in also here a click event for this button. So first of all, let's look at what happens whenever I type in something here. I get it, it turns green. So why does it turn green? I said whenever I do stuff, anything on this input form up here, I've binded it to this method. So let's look into the test chat name. And it's a long one. Most of it is just console log. So as you can see here, I can keep up with what's happening. Let's just close that one again. Then I say, if the chat name is smaller than 3 characters, turn it red. No need to bother the web API for this. And write out to the log. What's more important here is, what if my name is bigger than 3? Then I'll look it up. So I'll send a GET request to my web interface, web API. It's called API chat name is unique, and then the name. And all it does, you can see here, this is an anonymous function that I've some built-in stuff into. It returns true. The chat name is unique, so it turns green. Or false, in else here, it says it's not unique, so it turns red. Okay, so let's look at the backend. What's happening? Go into the web API controller and type in action. Your web API controller must look like this. And if you don't have a web API config, then it's because you have chosen the wrong template when you created your project. And if you have several more folders over here, it's just because you haven't deleted them as I have done to make my project as simple as possible. So the first of all, I need some storage, and I use my constructor to create the storage. We'll look into the storage in a short while. Then I have my action name is unique. So I'll see here so I say API, that comes from the web API config. It says, first of all, its name is API. Second of all, I said controller. And the controller is called chat name. And we can see it here, chat name controller. Not chat name controller in here, remember that. And then secondly I said unique, which matches with the action name. So is unique is the action name. Then I said optional ID. So if we go to the chat, we can see here that I'm entering the chat name enclosure. So if we go to the chat controller, put a breakpoint, and we'll go over here and set something. We can see here that the ID comes in here. I'll just say continue. So one way to send off data is through the ID session. If I just stop this, I could actually say, what if ID is equal to null? Then I wouldn't return an OK. I would return a bad request instead. Get is asking for data, and you can have a parameter, you can even have more. You can just add several here. Now I can have 2 IDs, but we won't be using that. So that's how I figure out if the name is unique or not. I have a binding more. I have a click send message here. So what do I do in my transmit message? First of all, I need the message to be larger than 2 characters. Otherwise, write in the console that the message was too short. Secondly, now I won't get it. Get means I want some data. Post means here is some data. So I want to post my message back to the server. Again, API, but this time my controller is called chat message. it's that one, and I have it open up here. And add new chat message. I have the same thing here with the constructor. So here I have the add new message. It simply just says the data I want to transmit, and it looks a little bit different here. That's because this is pure JSON. I have created a JSON object, and it says the chat name, take that from the chat name, and the message, take that from the message. And I have said here, instead of the string ID, I said I have a DTO object, data transfer object, which is called add new, that I'm entering. So if I'm scrolling down here, I can see the object here. This is important. JavaScript is not strong typed. Even doesn't really have types, so you can do anything. You can create on the fly JSON object as I did. With C# it's much different. So this is a strongly typed, so I need to create a class that matches the JSON object, and I've done that here. So what I'm simply saying is I require demand of my data to match this class. So now I can say store it, please. So in my storage I have a save message, and when that is done I return an OK, and if it's for some reason fails I return a bad request. So we can enter a breakpoint just to see how it works. So first of all, enter my unique name, enter my message, hello all. I enter the breakpoint. You can see here it's a data transfer object. It contains menu and hello all. There's yet another feature, because my message is popping up here. And if I just close this one, you can see here that in my document ready, I call the read all method. What I does here in my read all is I said, please read everything. I have actually two things here. First of all, read the amount of messages. I have done that to show you how to deal with non-JSON objects. So I just get a data object in return, and I put that in my span that we can see down here. There. So in here I said, please read the amount of data and put it in my heading here. You can see that. It says one message. The next thing I do is I then read API, chat messages, all messages. I type 10 in here just to show you that if I go into here, I can find it. So what happens here is I get an ID. The 10 thing, we can put a breakpoint in here to see what happens. We can see here, I get the 10, and that was just to show you that you can transmit IDs along with the get. You might say get all of this person, and then you need to send the person and then get it all back. But in this case I actually don't need it, so I'll just delete it. So what I want to return is, of course, if it went okay or not. And then I want to return a list of all the messages. So once again I put in this here that says D2 all messages, and I have a timestamp as a string, chat name as a string, and a message as a string. I've mentioned up here that you could use a date time and enter it here. It could also be a long, an int, a float, whatever you want in here. A list of other objects as well. And as you can see up here, I have formatted, and that's why I use a string. I use the C# to format the date time as I want it to be. This is the format of my date time. And I just use C# to format it. Underneath you can see how I would do it if I just wanted to transmit the timestamp. But this time I transmit the string of the formatted timestamp. So I want to get all of it. And you remember they came as a list of data transfer objects. So I said, please delete everything in the table body. And then for each in the list, create a new row. So it has here the value that it is iterating through. So the first value, chat name, the second value, timestamp, and the third value is the message. And as JavaScript is not strongly typed, it really doesn't care if timestamp is a date time, or it is a string, or it is an integer. It will format it by itself, by its own default values. And then I append this row to this table. And I wait for 500 milliseconds, and then I request it all again. Up to calling myself within a 500 millisecond interval. This is called polling. Now I'll want to show you my code. So the JavaScript and the read all, this is the one that every half a second will read all the messages from the server. Transmit a message. So this is the one that transmit using a JQuery post and transmit back to the web API. This one is testing if my chat name is okay. This one is responsible for doing setting up my entire JavaScript when the document is ready. Here is the HTML for the entire page. In the constructor I set up the storage, and we haven't looked at the storage because in this video we really don't care how to store it, but I'll show you in a few minutes. Then I set up an action, count all messages, and it's a getter. So what it really does is it just asks my storage to count them all. And as you can see, it returns an integer. Not a JSON, just an integer. Then we have the add message here. It returns either OK or bad request. It takes in a JSON object of data, and we can then ask our storage to save the message, and we are unfolding the data for it. We could send the DTO object directly to the save message, but then we would have a closely binding between the JavaScript and the web API that is binded together with this DTO object. We really don't want to include the storage device into that binding. So we are unfolding it here, unpacking the data, and letting the storage device itself pack the data as it wants. And then we have the last one here is all the messages, and we really just say here's a list that we can return. So for each item that we get in return from the read all messages, by the way I have a maximum of 40, please format stuff and put it into the object and return the list. And down here we can see the two DTO objects that I use. It's private because I don't want anybody else to touch it. Only the methods are allowed to touch it. And it's static because if it's static, everybody who have access to the web page have access to this one through the methods. So static means that as long as the web server is up, the static variable is set. Pay attention. When I use it on my web server, I had told my web server that it is okay to be online forever. Most web servers has a limited amount of minutes or hours that it's up. And that's because all my static stuff are using up memory. And if you have an Azure account or any other cloud hosted account and nobody is looking at your page for several minutes or hours, maybe even days, they want to close down your web page to save memory on their server. And then when they close it down, of course when somebody enters your web page, they will boot it up again, but then the static variables will be empty. So the static trick here is only working as long as there are users on your web page. Or if you, as I've done it, put in that the static variable should be up forever. And forever means until next reboot or whatever I do. And I of course used a collection that are in the concurrent library, and I just used a concurrent bag. And it stores stored messages, which is the class that you can see down here. So it stores the datetime, the chat name, and the message itself. And I of course newed it up here, because otherwise it won't work. Then I have this is name unique feature, where I just ask the chat messages to get me the first object it finds with this chat name. And if it returns other than null, then your name is not unique, else it is unique. Count is equally simple. Please just return the chat message.count. Then I have a cleanup account. And that's because I know that some of you would make a script that just enters data and lots of data. And eventually my web server's 32 gigabytes of memory will be full and you're laughing your ass off. So to prevent you from that, I put in here, then if the chat message count, as long as it's less than 10,000, don't do anything. But if it gets higher than 10,000, create a new bag, as I have it here. Read the newest 1,000 of them. So I said, order them descending by datetime and take the first 1,000 and add them to the new bag. And then eventually the old bag will be destroyed. Then I have the actual save message down here. That simply does say, check if the name is unique, otherwise throw an exception. Please check if it's called script in the message or in the name, throw an exception. And that's because some of you fools would see if you could enter a script. You might enter a JavaScript of a Polish polka playing whatever dude and then make a script injection, and I don't want that on my web page. If you use Razor, you don't have to use these two, but I don't use Razor, I use ordinary HTML. If you come as far as to here, I just create the object and add it to the message and call the cleanup just in case. The last thing I'll show you here is the read all messages. It takes a max count, so it's ordering descending and taking the first 40 of them in this case, adding it to the list and returning it. Pay attention that I do not return the bag itself. I don't want anybody to have access to the bag. That's why it's private. So I create a new list and I return that one. This way I have a lower binding between the data storage and the actual web API.